morning, everybody. Welcome to another webinar series relating to COVID-19. Our programs, which started in April, have covered a various number of topics, and we will continue the program. We have one scheduled on small business administration. That's with the district director, and you're all welcome to go on our site and register for that program. Today, I'm so pleased to have as our guest and a friend to me is Senator Michael Broderick, a Democratic member of the Massachusetts Senate from Westport, Massachusetts, down there in the South Coast. Mike has been in the Senate and been in the House of Representatives, and that's where we met when I was a staff member in the House. And Mike has served in various committees in both the House and the Senate. Mike particularly takes an interest in economic development, business issues. He's been the chair of revenue and economic development, and brings the mindset of a small businessman and what it's like to do business in the Commonwealth to the Senate, as well as being very engaged with issues like recovery, mental illness, helping folks who need care and treatment, which we all know is a very important issue today. Today, the Senate, as I just learned, is going to do a health care bill. So, as chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, as folks on the phone may or may not know, is the committee that really handles all matters that have any fiscal impact on the Commonwealth. So really, everything comes through the Ways and Means Committee. The issue that is usually in play as we speak this time of year is the state budget. July 1 is the start of the fiscal year, FY21. And because of COVID-19, the governor did file his budget in January, and then it's usually the House in April, then the Senate in May, and then a conference committee with the goal of July 1. The governor did file, but after that, those things did not occur. And the governor last week filed a 1/12 budget for July, which is essentially a maintenance budget. I think it might be $5 billion or so. So that's the jurisdiction of Senate Ways and Means. It's my pleasure to introduce Senator Michael Rodrigues. Senator, good morning to you.
Good morning, Bill. It's great to be back with you and your audience.
Thank you. Thanks for making time for us today. And one thing I did forget to mention in the intro was the work you did on the grand bargain last year. I know many folks on the call had an interest in that, and thanks for that. As I said, I divided this up, our conversation, really into three parts, and really the state of the Massachusetts economy prior to March of this year, prior to COVID-19, and then the impact of COVID-19 would be the second part, and then the third part would be going forward with FY21 and beyond. So, could you describe for us briefly how was I using my invitation that it was going gangbusters? Could you describe for us where we were when COVID-19 hit us in March?
We were, to use your euphemism, going gangbusters. The economy was, moving right along at a healthy pace. The last time I spoke to your group in person was in the fall, and the number one issue from the employer community was lack of available workforce. We're at full employment, 2.5% unemployment. So revenues were flowing in healthily, very, very healthily wise. We had forecast a 2.8% growth for FY21 on revenue over and above FY20. In FY20 was 6.8%. The actual was from the year before. So, revenues were flowing in. As Chair of Ways and Means, every month when we get our report from the Department of Revenue, we were $100 million above benchmark. The good news is that the legislature was very disciplined with all the surplus revenue we received we realized over the last couple of years, and we banked it away into our stabilization fund, so-called rainy day account. So right up until the middle of March, things were going great. There were some storm clouds on the horizon. There were some indications that the economy was going to slow down. What we heard in December, when we convened all our economists for our annual consensus revenue hearing, was that the number one threat to continued economic growth was the lack of available workforce, that employers in the business community, there was no one left for them to hire in order for their business to grow. Boy, how things have changed. And I won't get into what happened during the pandemic, but the world changed a lot come the middle of March.
I was at that hearing in December, and I'm trying to think about the testimony of the economists, of mass taxpayers, and Treasurer Goldberg and Professor Goldman from down in Dartmouth. Was there any particular industry that we heard that day that was looking for workers, or was that across the board?
Across the board, every industry segment I spoke to were having trouble getting qualified employees, whether they were blue collar in the building trades, in the service industry, whether they were white collar in the high tech industry, life science, computer tech. The number one issue to every employer I spoke to, regardless of the industry segment they were in, was unavailability of qualified workforce. It was universal.
At that time, as you look forward, were there initiatives or spending initiatives, particularly, that you had envisioned on your horizon or on the Senate's horizon at that time that now has been derailed a bit? Were there any? I know education funding. You passed that education bill last year.
Oh yeah. I mean, number one was the Student Opportunity Act. The legislature spent months last year debating, amending, and working on an update to the Chapter 70 funding formula, the first major reform of Chapter 70 in over 20 years, recognizing how our student population has changed so much over the last 2 decades, acknowledging the fact that school districts that have high number of English language learners, high number of low income students, it costs a lot more money to provide education for those students. And we passed an update to the Chapter 70 formula that would call for a $1.5 billion infusion of new dollars over 7 years. We had planned on a 7-year roll-in. The governor filed his budget in January based upon that law. He included in his budget $303 million above and beyond what we appropriated for Chapter 70 in FY20. And we were certainly on the path to fully fulfill our commitment for the Student Opportunity Act. Above and beyond that, there were so many areas of additional investment we were looking at, not only K through 12 education, but higher education, early childcare, early education, pre-K, universal pre-K. There were so many spending initiatives that we were focusing on. And remember, although there's never enough money to go around, our revenue increases were steady and sustainable. We had forecast, and the governor filed his budget built upon a 2.8% revenue increase. And then, all hell broke loose come mid-March.
Yeah. Well, you've used the phrase the self-induced coma. You have used that phrase, and to describe COVID-19. So here we are. We're in the first couple of months of of this calendar year, and in the second half of the fiscal year. And as you say, we're going gangbusters, and everything is looking good. In the first week of March, the February revenues come out. March 3rd or 4th that week, and they were strong, maybe even a little ahead of the December conversations.
Yeah.
And then that week, and then particularly the next week, the end of say December 12th and 13th there, and then of course the following week we have a shutdown. Comparing it to where we thought we were and the impact of COVID-19, could you give us, I know it's quite graphic, could you give us what the impact of COVID-19 has been on the Massachusetts economy and therefore people in the Commonwealth?
Certainly. We only have a couple weeks left, probably better measuring it in days left, until June 30th, when it's the end of fiscal year 20. And my guess is we will close fiscal year 20 about $700 to $900 million, say $800 million in the red, in the hole. Just April 1st, we, as you said, March numbers came out, and we entered the month of April about $273 million in the black. And since then, a couple things have happened. First of all, as you know, the phrase I used is we put our economy into a medically induced coma, suspended animation, if you will, that the economy was moving along great. And then we had mandatory shutdowns, non-essential business closures. With one executive order, Boston Mayor Marty Walsh, when he shut all the construction projects down in the city of Boston, put 12,000 highly paid blue-collar union building trades men and women out of work on the unemployment line. And these are men and women that that make good money and that spend good money and contribute a lot to the economy. So, everything stopped. And in addition to that, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts joined the federal government in deferring our income tax filing and collections from April 15th to July 15th. And while in the federal government, it's not really that big of a deal because April 15th or July 15th still reside in the same fiscal year, for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, it was a very big deal because April 15th is in FY20, July 15th will be in FY21. So not only did we see tremendous revenue loss from pretty much across the board from taxes, we also had created a real cash flow problem. So we did enact emergency legislation to allow the governor and our state treasurer to short-term borrow, something that we call RANs, Revenue Anticipation Notes. So we had to pass a special act of the legislature to authorize them to borrow money in fiscal year 20 using anticipated revenue in fiscal year 21 to pay those notes back. So it was, as you said at the outset, Bill, right at this time of year, traditionally, myself and my team in Senate Ways and Means are hunkered down on long daily conversations and negotiations with our friends from the House Committee on Ways and Means in negotiating a conference committee budget and working out the differences between the House and Senate budget. Instead, what we've been doing since March is I had to take my fiscal hat off and keep my policy hat on, and the legislature has been very, very busy in passing one piece of COVID-related legislation after another, many of them dealing with local municipalities, amending state laws to allow our local governments to operate in this pandemic world, allowing them to remotely changed the open meeting laws to allow remote meetings to count in the open meeting laws, changed the way we conduct our town meetings, allow them to defer and extend their elections, allow them to file and enact 1/12 budgets like we do in the legislature. So we did, remote and digital notarization. It's been one policy bill after another since March, when we would normally be pretty much laser focused just on the FY21 operating budget. As you said also earlier, the governor did file a 1/12 budget, and we will be enacting that. And let me just say, it's 1/12 in terms of the calendar, meaning that it's enough money to keep us going 1/12 of the year, or 1 month for the month of July. It is not 1/12 in terms of dollars. It is $5.25 billion. Our annual operating budget is more or less about $45 billion. However, there's a lot of upfront expenditures necessary, especially for those accounts that we receive federal participation in federal match. We need to pay those expenses up front. So our budgets are front end loaded. The governor filed his 1/12 budget based upon the lower of either FY20's line item or his budget, House 2. I can tell you that FY20 is pretty much all of the budget is level funded with FY20, because when the governor did file his budget in January, he had about $6 billion more dollars than what we have now to spend.
Well, Senator, would you describe for us, as we continue on, back in April, I think it was April 14th, you participated in an economic summit with the chair of House Ways and Means and with the Secretary of Administration and Finance. And you heard from that time from economists and some trade associations, and they were making predictions about going forward. And now I understand some of those estimates and predictions have changed. Since April, how have you seen the landscape going forward? I know you've given estimates as well, but that was I know you've talked about even doing another summit in the future. But right. How has that landscape looked since the first look under the hood on April 14th, just 1 month in, really, into COVID-19?
Unfortunately, it looks worse than where we were in April. Yeah, we reconvened our economic experts on the 14th of April to. We knew then that we'd had to hit push the redo button on FY21's consensus revenue number, and at that time they were between $3 and $5 billion projected revenue shortfall for FY21. That number. Eileen McEnany, our good friends over at Mass Taxpayers Foundation, have come back with an updated number closer to just a little bit north of $6 billion of revenue shortfall for FY21, and that's the number that we're running with right now. A lot has changed. On the 14th of April, economists predicted somewhere between 13 and 15% unemployment. We are close to 25% unemployment right now. When you consider that we have over 900,000 individuals on our traditional unemployment system, that started, by the way, at about 140,000. We went from 140,000 to 930,000 in 2 short months on our traditional unemployment. And then through one of the federal coronavirus relief acts, they allowed heretofore individuals who were not permitted to join our unemployment. They were not part of our unemployment system. They did not pay into premiums, unemployment insurance premiums. Those individuals are so-called independent contractors, self-employed individuals, employees of the so-called gig economy. They were allowed to file something called PUA, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. That added another 570,000 people collecting unemployment assistance. So we went from about 140,000 to 1.5 million people on unemployment assistance in 3 short months. So as you can imagine, that's had a drastic effect on the economy. It's had a drastic effect on the business community. There are some, there are some silver linings. The fact that the federal government provides an additional $600 per week on top of the traditional unemployment assistance, insurance assistance meant that many employees who are unemployed were made whole in their household income. So consumer spending, although our retail bricks and mortar stores have been closed and are just now beginning to reopen, online consumer spending it has really done well. I joke that I can't drive 1 block without seeing an Amazon Prime truck delivering something somewhere uh, throughout my district. So the real issue, and I guess we're going to talk about the recovery, but
Right.
the big unknown is what is this recovery going to look like?
Right. I said just 2 questions. Just one clarification for me on the income tax delay to July. That those income tax payments, whether it's personal or whether it's capital gains, that's from the calendar year 19, right? That's,
Correct.
I mean, yeah. So that's when times were still good.
Yes.
So do you
Yes.
have a sense of what kind of numbers you're going to see there? Those numbers should be good.
They are good. They are good. Well, those numbers were the numbers we used to build our FY20 consensus revenue number.
Yeah.
Of 3 point FY20 was 3.1% growth was our consensus revenue figure. So I think those numbers are good. So I think we deferred round figures about 1.6 to $2 billion from FY20 into FY21. We are working. Let me just give a shout out to my colleagues. I can tell you, since this pandemic started, we in the Senate Ways and Means have been working very, very closely and collaboratively with our friends, Ways and Means, and in the administration. Secretary Mike Heffernan and his team at A&F. We're pretty much joined at the hip. We have regular weekly standing in-person meetings, socially distanced, of course. Our staffs, our budget directors, all 3 of our budget directors are on daily or multiple time a day calls because we are trying to figure out, we have an FY21 budget that we have to put to bed. We cannot rely on 1/12 budgets forever. Our communities, our local cities and towns, they have budgets they have to write. They have responsibilities that they have to meet, and they are very, very reliant on state aid, whether it's Chapter 70 for their local school districts or unrestricted government aid to provide them resources to help pay for their police, their fire, their highway departments, public works, the administrative offices in their towns and city halls. So, it's unlike, I don't think you will see a traditional budget process where the House passes their version of the budget expressing their priorities. We in the Senate pass our version of the budget expressing our priorities, and then we engage in a sometimes long and drawn out, hard fought conference committee battle. That will not happen for FY21.
More of a collaborative approach in terms of putting the budget together.
Absolutely. Yep. We're already doing that. Yes.
Before we go on to the third leg of the stool, as far as I heard Professor Goodman, who you know well from UMass Dartmouth, and he talked at Mass Business Roundtable one day about 2 industries that have been impacted greatly that we usually rely upon: higher
Yeah,
education and healthcare, and
right.
healthcare in the broader sense of the term. Hey, can you comment particularly on what you've heard or seen as it
Yeah,
pertains to those two industries?
certainly. So we in prior recessions have been able to rely on very two industries. We call them the eds and meds, our higher educational institutions and our hospitals, healthcare institutions to provide pretty steady employment and pretty steady revenue. Both of those industries are in flux right now. Healthcare, our hospitals, if you read the Boston Globe, they're due to lose in the range of $5 to $8 billion collectively because of this pandemic. Why? Even though our hospitals and our community health centers are doing heroes work in dealing with the coronavirus pandemic and the thousands, hundreds of thousands of patients for coronavirus, they have not been participating in elective surgeries, elective procedures, in diagnostic services. No CAT scans, no MRIs, no orthopedic surgeries, anything that's been elective. Those tend to be more or less the profit centers in a hospital, dealing with chronically sick inpatient individuals, especially if you are a hospital that's highly reliant on public pay, i.e. Mass Health or Medicare. You need those diagnostic services. You need those elective procedures in order to make money and break even. Well, those have been suspended, so they're very much hurting. In our higher educational institutions, I mean, we saw already what's happened with Mount Ida. We hear of other smaller liberal arts institutions that have been the you know, have been some of the pillars of Massachusetts strength. They're hurting. They don't know if they're going to reopen in September. They don't know what's going to happen with their international students, who they rely on to pay full freight, and they paid a full boat of tuition. New expenses relative to gearing up their online learning. So both of those industries are very, very much under a lot of stress. So we cannot rely on them to help buoy us against the recession this time around.
Yeah, they usually at one time you could call them recession-proof at one time, but
Yeah,
certainly not now. The other
yeah.
impact of those two places, healthcare facilities and the higher ed, is they're usually also the major employer in their community. So if you look at some
Oh yeah,
colleges in some of the towns,
yeah.
folks who work there come from from, I don't want to use the word neighborhood, that's too narrow, but from that area. And the same thing with hospitals. You look down your way, where the
Oh,
employees
South
come
Coast
from.
Hospital. Yeah, South Coast Hospital that has Charlton Memorial Hospital in Fall River and St. Luke's Hospital in New Bedford is by far the largest employer uh, down here in the South Coast. You add in UMass Dartmouth and Bristol Community College and Bridgewater State University, and those are the other largest employers. So those two industries provide lots of employment and and good wage employment also.
Yeah. Well, I know we're going to get into recovery, but before I do that, though, I think some of those institutions did get some benefit out of the first CARES Act. Do you
Yes.
do you see further? And I'm jumping ahead a bit, but do you see? And that saved a lot of those. Well, not saved them, but that was a great assistance to these providers in community health centers and so forth. And as you just said, they're in further need of that as well. So now going forward, we are FY21 is 2 weeks away essentially, and we have a 112 that's been filed, and I think the House did it the other day. Senate may do it when? Tomorrow? Is that on the
Yeah,
agenda yet?
we'll enact it tomorrow. We engrossed it on Monday. We'll enact it tomorrow. Yes. Yep.
So now we're proceeding. There's more talk. There was talk about another federal stimulus. Kind of a broad question as you're moving forward. You've given a number of 6+ billion. What do you need do you think? What does the Commonwealth need from the federal government to sort of move forward, get back to an even keel, if possible, to right the ship, whatever metaphor you want to use? What do you think we need from the federal government? What kind of assistance?
I would say between 3 and 4 billion. So let's just do back of the envelope math, Bill. So don't hold me to any of these numbers, okay? With $6 billion, we all agree with $6 billion, we're going to have $6 billion revenue shortfall over our consensus revenue. Pretty much universally agreed. Everyone accepts that number. What do we know? We know that we have $3.5 billion in our rainy day account. That's an all-time historic high, and I credit my colleagues for being very disciplined over the last few years in order to build that balance and not spend that money. There's always pressure to spend, as you know, Bill.
Yeah.
So $6 billion hole, I would like to use like $1.5 billion out of that, but let's for round figures say we use $2 billion out of that. So it's, 6 billion less 2 billion, that still leaves us a $4 billion hole. Where are we going to backfill that 4 billion? The big wild card is the federal government. We expect another federal stimulus. We know that the U.S. Congress, House of Representatives, passed something called the HEROES Act that provided lots of money for states and local governments to help them. We also know that back during the last recession, 2009 and 10, under President Obama, the so-called ARRA funding provided lots of money for states to backfill their budget losses. Those were the dollars that we were able to use to ensure that at the time our Chapter 70 numbers were level funded and held harmless. There are opportunities maybe for some new revenues. The governor did propose about $400 million of new revenue ideas in his budget that we're going to take a close look at. But it's either new revenue, whether it comes from the federal government or new taxes or budget cuts. We certainly, we will certainly engage in preliminary budget cuts that will be very conservative but not destructive. But you cannot cut that much out of the budget without getting into the bones and into the marrow and start doing things like looking at our, 61% of the state budget is human services. It's mass health and Medicaid. That's health care for our seniors. That's reimbursements for our nursing home and long-term care facilities that are really struggling during this pandemic crisis. That's services for our developmentally disabled, mental health services, our elder affairs, services. None of those we want to cause any critical damage to or any real destructive damage to. So, 4 billion, and we'll be able to breathe easy. Anything less than that, we're going to have to get very, very creative, and we will get very, very creative.
When we have to know, but when will the feds have to act in order? They don't have to act at all, I know, but as
2 months ago.
As you're planning, 2 months ago, I know. But
yeah.
when now? Is it July? Is it?
Yeah. So I am in regular. We are lucky to have Congressman Richie Neal, the chair of the House Committee on Ways and Means, for Massachusetts. Congressman Neal is, we are in regular touch with him. We were under the impression up until a couple weeks ago, the U.S. Senate was going to act prior to their 4th of July recess on their version of the federal stimulus bill, notwithstanding the comments we heard from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who's, you probably remember his public comments that states should consider bankruptcy as an option to get out of this recession. By the way, there is no ability for states to go bankrupt. There are no ability, but that's a whole nother story. Let's not confuse the issue with facts. But then the world changed again with the murder of George Floyd. And right now, as you read today in the Globe, that racism and has taken over as the top priority and top thing on our citizens' minds, not the economy. So right now we're hoping that by mid-July, the Senate act so that before we break on July 31st, the legislature is scheduled to go out of session, out of formal session on July 31st, so that before we break and leave session, we can pass, whether it's the full annual budget or, another short-term 1/12, 2/12, or some sort of interim budget to get us through the next few months.
Any two questions? Any sense of going beyond July 31st to deal if these aren't resolved? Any sense of going beyond?
I would say we you were around when that rule was enacted, Bill, and you know why that rule was enacted. A lot of things happen in lame duck sessions that people don't like, that really sometimes don't pass the smell test. So the legislature has been very disciplined since, I believe, 94, when that rule change was enacted, that we have not come back into session post July 31st. This year might be the year that an exception is made, but we're very, very reluctant to establish that precedent, because I can tell you every 2 years as July 31st approaches, there always seems to be a compelling reason why we should come back into session after July 31st. And it's not because we're lazy and we don't want to work, because you know me, I'm literally in the State House 7 days a week.
I know you.
It's because of what can happen during those times. But I would say if there's going to be a year that we come back post July 31, it will be this year. I doubt like hell it will be before September. I don't think it'll be in August or September. I mean, it is also an election year, so members have campaigns that they're working on also.
What are you hearing from, just generally, before I wrap up, what are you hearing from members? What as they're in their districts, it's a re-election year, but they're in their districts and they're on the ground there. They're hearing from their constituents who may be struggling, and many are. What are you hearing from your colleagues in the Senate as they come and see you? I don't mean budget requests per se, but I'm sure they have those. But just what are they sharing with you about how things are out there?
They're very worried and very concerned. Tourism is the third leading economy, and after eds and meds, it's tourism. And you look at the Cape, and you look at the Berkshires. You look at the fact that Tanglewood has already suspended its season for this summer. Who knows how the Cape is going to rebound? These regions of the state rely on those dollars in order to support their economy, and it's only a short window for them to make their money. So my colleagues from out west and out the Cape are very, very concerned. Anybody that's in the hospitality industry, restaurants, hotels, the like, what is going to be the new normal? When are people going to be comfortable going out to eat again? When are people going to be comfortable going to sports arenas and stadiums and concerts and entertainment venues? When are people going to be comfortable riding public transportation again, getting on the T? In the fall, when I spoke at your forum, transportation congestion was the number one topic of the day, along with, workforce availability. And although traffic is back, on Southeast Expressway and coming up Route 24. You know, for 6 weeks, as I was traveling back and forth to the State House every day, I was making it in 58 minutes. There was nobody on the road. You know, now we're reopening, and people are going to be on the road more than ever because they don't want to take commuter rail. They're not comfortable. They're afraid to go on the T, and to take the subway. So, you know, the big Dr. Fauci says it best that when it comes to the recovery, we don't make the timeline. The virus makes the timeline. And until, and only until there is a vaccine that's developed, where people will feel comfortable again, socially engaging with one another, will our economy begin to recover. But with that being said, you know, there's going to be a new normal. One thing this pandemic has made people realize is that employees can become very, very efficient working remotely and working from home. Pretty much my entire Ways and Means staff, and there's over a dozen of them, fiscal analysts and attorneys, you know, are working remotely every day, except for my general counsel and my budget director, who work remotely half the time and are in the State House half the time. We're trying to be very, very careful. And they're getting the job done. It's very, very efficient. So, you know, I wonder what's going to happen, Bill, to the seaport. What's going to happen to financial district in Boston? All this high-priced commercial office space. Are these businesses going to realize it's more effective and efficient and cost efficient to invest in the latest, greatest technology and provide it to every employee and tell them to work at home remotely?
Well, you know, I've been in the seaport. I've gone in a few times to get some papers and stuff at the office, and it is kind of a, you know, bit of a ghost town. You will see a change. Talk to the different people about, including us as well, the firm, about how many people will be coming back into the office, and staggered days. Because the office itself, different people talk about, you know, the trend was open spaces in offices, but that, as opposed to the small office, you know, the offices, the personal offices, that's going to change back to the office structure, I think, because of the open space doesn't work in a lot of places anymore. So, you know, you are right. The impact is, you know, that's the thing about this virus is the impact is not just one industry or one issue or one matter. It hit everybody hard. It's just my last question to you, and you sort of said it, but I'll ask it anyways.
Sure.
Are you hopeful? I've asked this question on all the webinars to people who have come on. Are you hopeful that we can and will recover? I just don't mean economically, but just in terms of our confidence and our well-being and our sense that we go back to the routines of our life that we all had, no matter what that may have been. Do you have hope as you think about things? And I know you do.
I do. I am optimistic. The fact that, you know, our economy was doing so well prior to the pandemic that we, for the first time, we are in a recession, not the cause of, you know, not because of a fiscal cause, but because of a public health cause, and that it was we who purposely, put our economy in a suspended animation, a medically induced coma. So there's pent up demand. The fact that there is money available, there is cash in the economy, that consumers, because of the additional unemployment assistance, you know, have money to spend. And, you know, I think it's going to be a new normal. I think people are going to be more cautious and careful on, in some areas of the economy, until this vaccine is created, are going to be slow to recover. But I am optimistic, Bill.
Yeah.
But
Well, you made a
but
comment that
psychological issue. I mean, people are
yeah,
people people are social animals. We are social animals. We, you know, uh, it's we want to see and be people. I'm a politician. I like to shake hands and my culture. I'm Portuguese. We hug and we kiss everybody. That's what we do. We are emotional people, and it's a whole new world.
yeah. Well, it certainly is. How we sort of get back to that routine of engaging with people, and we all miss it. We all miss it. We've covered a lot of things this morning, and I'm so grateful that you're at the helm and you're working with Chairman Michaelwitz and Secretary Heffernan. There's so many topics, and we've covered a lot of them as you move forward. I just want to end with something. Last night I was on a virtual fundraiser for a program called Scholar Athletes, which is in Boston, Everett, and Springfield, and it gives tutoring and counseling and assistance to student athletes in high school level, and it's been around now about 11 years, and they had the fundraiser last night, and they had some athletes from the Bruins and the Celtics and the Patriots giving the kids encouragement. They're all going to college, and the Julian Edelman of the Patriots gave the best. He congratulated the students, and then he said to them this quote: "Tough times don't last. Tough people do." And
Yep.
that's how I'm going to end this, Senator. We
Yep.
will. We will come back from this. And that quote just struck me, and I share that with you and everybody on the call. And I want to thank you for your kindness and friendship to me and to everyone at NADA. But thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure, Bill. Anytime. Thank you for all you do. Thank you.
Bye, well. Bye, everybody now. And thank you all for joining us. And have a good day. Thank you all. Bye-bye.